In the dead of night, when the moon is high and ill winds blow, and the banshees cry and the moonlight casts an unearthly glow, arise, my love, with tales of woe.
Good evening. It is 12 midnight, the paranormal hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. I'm your host, Chief Lawson. Ghost to Ghost is a podcast to discuss all paranormal and parapsychology subjects. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats, so tell your friends, tell your family. Come listen to Ghost to Ghost. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is that time. It is time for Ghost to Ghost. Tonight, our topic is Pandemic Ghost. Tonight, my co-hosts are Heather Lawson, case manager and podcast director.
Hello.
And Eric Kerr, co-producer and research assistant with Spirit.
Hi there.
Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the possibility of whether pandemics certainly create ghosts. And we know that, that mass of death, that mass amount of death is bound to create something. So, we started researching this a little bit, and it goes back to the previous pandemic, and a lot of people don't realize that, COVID certainly was the pandemic of our lifetime, but in 1918 we had the Spanish flu come through, and it had a lot of the similarities of actually COVID-19. So we're going to start out with a little bit of the information here. And as long as there's been life on Earth, there have been plagues that take it away. Eruptions of mass hysteria took hold of the world during these pandemics. The plagues destroyed families, businesses, resources, and entire civilizations in a lot of cases. Ghosts of the pandemic were these ghosts of the victims that perished, or they really crisis apparitions. That's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. The pandemic brought about unprecedented changes in the world, affecting every aspect of life. As people found themselves isolated and confined to their homes, stories of ghostly apparitions began to surface. These tales range from eerie to downright terrifying, suggesting that the stress and fear of the pandemic had awakened something supernatural. My individuals reported seeing shadowy figures lurking in their homes, hearing unexplained noises, and feeling a chilling presence that they could not explain. The ghosts seemed to thrive in the atmosphere of uncanny and uncertainty and anxiety, feeding off of all of them and all this unease in the crisis. At the same time, researchers and paranormal enthusiasts took a keen interest in this phenomena, conducting investigations and gathering accounts from those who had experiences, spectral encounters, and so forth. Some theorized that ghosts were manifestations of collective trauma faced by humanity during the pandemic. Kind of a form of crisis apparition. This idea kind of posts to the fact that it highlighted emotional stress and energy generated by the ongoing crisis, create a very fertile field or media for supernatural occurrences. Whether these ghosts were remnants of the past or new entities born from the contemporary struggles of the pandemic, I don't know we'll ever 100% know in some cases. The sightings and experiences were undeniable, though. They did pick up. A lot of people, I think, thought that this was from the fact that, there was actually two trains of thought, and everybody can kind of weigh in on this. One train of thought during 2020. Eric, were you guys in Indiana during 2020?
No, we were in Florida.
Okay, so you're going to have a little bit different demographic to share with us. When we were up here, of course, we were at the old place, and when the lockdown came, it was panic, because most of these people, including ourselves, had never lived through a pandemic. They had no idea what to expect, and and certainly
it was quite obvious.
Oh yeah. Of course, one of my things I remember the best was this clip on Facebook, and one of the guys, one of my fellow pipers, had went to a Walmart and stood on the empty shelves of the toilet paper aisle and played Amazing Grace. I never will forget it. I mean, it had a certain amount of irony to the whole thing. But, we had several members, some that are no longer with us at the time, but they had said, hey, we noticed activity starting up in the home. And a lot of people, I think, said, hey, the reason why is they're in their home and they can't leave it. And they're noticing things that have always been there that they didn't notice before and they blew by. Or another train of thought says, well, because the energy was all centralized and at that one location in their house, that their energy provided a media or a way for these spirits to come in and feed off of, and that's why they were there. Maybe they were spirits that were always there, and
because now they're spending more time than they did before.
Exactly, and they're noticing them, and they have more energy to manifest where they can notice them better. Third train of thought says, okay, some of these folks are people that have passed on due to the pandemic, and I mean either way. I mean certainly, either way that could, one way or another affect that. I mean I get that, I really do. Now whether or not. And this is one of these things that you don't really know. I mean, of course, if you know the apparition is Aunt Maud, then yeah, you know that it obviously is a family member. Now, if Aunt Maud died 40 years before the pandemic, obviously she is an apparition of the pandemic. But, there's still a field of argument there that some of these are brought on by stress. That, the fact that, we're all upset and we're all huddled in and caged in, if you will, in this one house, the energy creates stress apparitions. And, we've talked about stress apparitions before, and for those that don't know what those are apparitions that come at time of need or during times of great sorrow and bereavement. So, your mother or father passes away, and then that night they come back to you and they appear. Most of the time it's for reassurance, but there's also times where they want you to know something or they're trying to tell you something. So, stress, apparitions are been around for a very long time. So now that's how kind of the thought was in Indiana. In Florida, how does that work out for you down there, Eric?
So I was living in Daytona Beach, and Florida is a pretty active, I would definitely call it a pretty active area, because you tended to have historically a lot of a very large indigenous population. A lot of Florida is pretty much is on top of Indian burial mounds, and that's growing up. And I think I've shared this on another podcast. My subdivision that I lived in at Ocala actually was built not far from Fort King. That was known as an area that was heavy with the Seminole Indians, Chief Osceola, etc. That's where he was from. My subdivision was built directly on top of an old Indian burial mound, and so I grew up in a house that was extremely active. I would hear whispers, but it was mainly just, I would see rocking chairs, rocking, things like that. Now, one thing I found interesting in the house we moved in Daytona, background information, I moved there in June of 2020. So before that, I was in Northern Virginia. So things weren't super active where I was there, but when I moved to Florida, I noticed two things. I noticed, number one, just people in general, once things started opening up, and Florida opened up before most of the rest of the country, people's behavior had changed. And to this day, 5 years later, I still feel like people's behavior has changed greatly. And I think it's due to a lack of socialization during the pandemic. So based on that information, why would it be odd for supernatural beings or spirits to have had the same type of renaissance, if you will? Because the house I lived in Daytona Beach, I had objects flying. I had dining chairs slamming into walls. I literally, for the first time in my life, I had spirits literally talking to me without the use of any electronics. They were whispering in my ear. They were calling me from down the hall. So I definitely think the pandemic could have changed that.
A real poltergeist experience.
Yes, in the house I live in now, we've seen shadow figures going up the stairs. And at 3 o'clock one morning, we literally had a guttural scream from our closet that was not human. So I think that after the pandemic, I think that a lot of things got more active.
Well, I know something you hit on, and yes, I think we could almost do an episode on how the pandemic changed life. I remember before I left for 9/11, after it happened, there was a commercial, and I can't remember what the commercial was, but there was a lot of commercials. I mean, again, you had the same. It wasn't a pandemic, but you had the same kind of egregious amount of energy. You had anger, you had certainly depression and sadness. And I remember there was a commercial that came on, and it showed the street, like a street, maybe New York, San Francisco. I mean, it wasn't a huge area, but it was a suburban area, and you seen all these porches and everything on these pretty close spaced houses. And then it came back on after 9/11, and it showed flags hung on every one of them. And I mean, yeah, I think that's one thing. Everybody, it was hard to find flags after 9/11. Everybody was buying them up, and it's the same thing with the pandemic. I think that was such a shock. I think that we certainly, with our energy, provided a way or a media for which the entities could enter our plane and stay there. I think that there was a lot of uncertainty. And you said something about people not wanting to meet, and it's still that way. I mean, it was 2025. We're 5 years out of the pandemic, and I still see a lot of people that, are very careful about meeting, and if they have any kind of health risk. Used to is, oh, hell, don't worry, there's nothing worry. And being a Freemason, part of our ability to fellowship is to get everybody at the lodge. We don't fellowship through social media and any of that. So one of the biggest problems that I noticed was, attendance, especially for the older guys that had a lot of health issues, dropped off immediately. And used to, wintertime, we knew when the weather started getting a little bad, some of these guys wouldn't show up because they wouldn't get out. It was either too bitter cold, they didn't want to catch bug, or there was bad driving and they didn't want to take a chance on wrecking their car or killing themselves, so they didn't get out. But suddenly we have a new fear. And I remember when it first started to happen, being in the EMS fire community, we were required to wear a mask. And I think me and Heather went to a Kroger. It was a Kroger over near where we live at. And, of course, Heather carried a lot of hand sanitizer, and we sanitized the handrail or push rail in the cart and so forth. But our whole mindset had changed. You had people... I'll never forget this. We get in an aisle, and I wasn't doing this to torture the individual. It was more of an experiment, but I noticed there were certain people at the other end of the aisle. If I moved closer to them, they moved further away. They made sure, they didn't want to be in an aisle with anybody else. I remember them, at one point, they wanted in another...
It happened at more than one place.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it wasn't just Kroger. No, I'm not just citing Kroger. But people suddenly became very afraid to be close to anybody because you didn't know who had it, who not. And sometimes I kind of think it's sort of like the zombie movies everybody seems to like it. We've taken such a shine to in the last few years because suddenly everybody want to take a chance on getting infected. And it's scary. I mean, I'm sure we all at this table lost somebody. And one of my best friends in the shrine passed away, and it was sad because his wife and daughter had conducted, and this is all before vaccines. They had got COVID, and so he was trying to take care of them. And then he didn't know it, but apparently he had a depressed immune system and also a high risk with his pulmonary system. He did not know this. His doctor hadn't discovered it. So he caught it while taking care of them, nursed him back to health, and ended up in the hospital and never left it. So certainly those kind of situations are going to produce an entity, in my opinion. I don't think there's any way around it. And I think certainly, there's still some people, I always tell people I think hospitals are the most haunted places. I think anybody that had COVID wards, it's still a high volume. Matter of fact, we were up there with my mother, I think it was, and we were looking, it was a community, and we were looking at some of the rooms, and some of the rooms had negative pressure machines.
Yeah, they were retrofitted with
Yeah, they're retrofitted so they could be used as wards to treat COVID. And, of course, they dismantled it now. But, it certainly shakes you up a little bit. Now, in Florida, I assumed it was the same across the country, but did you have as much problem with getting groceries and things in, before they did the lockdown?
No, I mean, in Florida, okay, so when the pandemic started in Virginia, your options were limited to the essential retailers, like your
Yeah.
Walmarts, your Targets. You would literally pay to have things delivered, because especially the further north you went, it
Yes.
became, there were less things open. So that kind of got to that place. Now, when you move to Florida, fast forward to June, there's still some of it. You still got masks. You still got people hesitant to go out. You can still get groceries delivered, but you saw some more people out for doing the basics. What I think has changed, and to this day I still see it the same, the pandemic was worldwide. It affected people worldwide. There was not a country on this planet that was not touched. But I don't think that there was a country in this planet that has been touched more than the United States, because now that the pandemic is over, your areas where you had high sociability, France, Italy, most of Europe, they've gone back to what the social norms were pretty much. You can go there and you see people out. You see businesses thriving. In the United States, and to a lesser extent Canada, you're seeing businesses go out because people are fundamentally changed forever. Society
Yes.
is changed. Look at all the department stores that are going out of business. Look at
Yeah.
it's caused mayhem.
It's even at the government level.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this country was probably touched more uniquely than any other country on earth, and so to be honest with you, I'd argue you're hearing most of the fundamental ghost type stories coming out of this country, and I think that it's because of the energy.
I agree. I think that there was numerous things. Of course, you're right. The businesses and closings couldn't survive, and I remember several people I knew who went out of business. They got COVID loans. They tried everything they could, but the mindset of the American people changed. Mm-hmm. And you're right. I think a lot of other countries, I remember the reports toward the into 2020, because a lot of the other countries said, hey, mask is not helping. If anything, it's hurting, and because people aren't disposing of them or washing them. Heather had made ours, and they had N95 inserts.
Or they weren't wearing them correctly.
Or they weren't wearing them correctly or whatever. So, they were saying that, they were
wearing them on their chin,
yeah,
and not covering their lips and nose.
Exactly. And people started in Europe, they just went ahead and started getting back sooner. And it actually, by statistics, it seemed like it helped. And I'm not trying to turn the episode into pandemic history,
Mm-hmm.
but I remember, and what got me interested in 1918 pandemic, they came on to the news, and the Historical Society of Indiana said,
They were anti-maskers for the flu too.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, there were, but what I was going to say is they had a journal, and they were asking, it was an online journal, and they were asking people to come and voice what they thought and everything about the pandemic, and you got to be recorded in history, and then this would be available, and 50 years from now, 60 years, someone come down and see your name and what you went through, and I thought it was kind of cool. So I got on there and made a little epitaph for me and Heather, and one of the things I found out is you could also access the Spanish flu epidemic. And when you get looking at it, oh yeah, they had anti-maskers then. They had people that were against and we're going to talk about that just a bit later in this episode, but they had people that were anti-vaccines because there was vaccines. As a matter of fact, the government at one point was telling a lot of the people, especially north in Dakotas, the Wyoming area, not to take them because the government felt they weren't tested enough. And I remember, I looked at this and I thought, wow, okay, so we're creatures of habit. This is a bit of a mirror.
Don't change much.
Yeah, I mean, and I have several good friends that are anti-vacciners, and people ask me, he said, well, so you're for vaccines? No, I don't want to start a big argument on that either. But no, I had to, because I was working with the fire service. I had to take the first two and then a booster. We haven't taken them since, but I feel our immunity, and I don't want to get into all that, but anyway, I feel like the immunity is fine. But you've got those two different people, and I watched that evolution. It was almost like evolution from Neanderthal to modern man, going back and forth, and all of them had good points, and but it was the same thing we were going through with the modern pandemic. And so when I got into this 2018 Spanish flu, I found out. Pardon?
1918.
1918. I'm sorry. One of the things that shocked me was, now of course we had one advantage they didn't. We could spread both facts and propaganda 3 times faster than anybody else.
Absolutely.
We had social media. Yeah, the internet. They didn't have it back then. And I looked through a bunch of pictures. There was probably 200 pictures from Indianapolis. And it showed, some of the markets saying that, they had instructions. They told people, leave a list of what you want, pass it under the door, okay, or push it up on the door because they didn't want to touch it. And they would gather whatever they had, but they were running out of, they had lists on the windows showing at a grocery store what they were out of. And I mean, so all that, and I said that to illustrate this, it brought around a huge amount of energy. And that energy was a perfect battery to allow, entities to come in. So one of the things that I caught from that time was when I was researching this was the Irish ghost hunters. They believe that the traumatic impact of COVID-19 pandemic was heightened the contact with the living, and certainly for the reasons we've already talked about. Shane O'Brien, who is the group leader for the Irish ghost hunters, on 28 October 2021. He said they had experienced a huge spike in activity at the country's most haunted sites throughout the entire course of the pandemic. IPI, which is another group there, that's, or actually I take it back, I think that's what Sean is the president of. It's Irish Ghost Hunters, or Irish Paranormal Investigators, IPI. It was one of Ireland's leading paranormal investigation groups, told the Irish Independent paper that activity had significantly increased in people's homes over the past 18 months. Now, bear in mind, this was taken in October of 21. So, IPI official Ann Massey said that it was common for stepovers from the spirit world to raise during times of social trauma such as pandemics and wars. She added that, she added the ghost hunters believe that the traumatic impact of COVID-19 pandemic had heightened the contact between that. It's twofold. More people are more aware of what's going on around them now and noticing these stepovers from the spirit realm. And she said, that paranormal investigators notice a surge of activity at the tourist attractions such as Spike Island, Malahide Castle, and I think it even came up with Limp Mansion, Loftus Hall, Wexford, in County Wexford, Kilmanium, Gaol, which is one of the jails. That's what a jail is over there in County Dublin, and other locations. They'd really have been some spikes. And now I'll tell you, and I know you weren't on the team at then, but, when this spike happened, we got a lot of that because, because we have an 800 number while it's a, 24-hour hotline, and not 800. I want to correct that. But we got a lot of calls. And, I mean, we did. We had a bunch of calls. And we didn't get to, we were hoping to get to investigate, but we had to be very careful because at the time you weren't allowed out unless you were on essential business. And we talked to these folks, but when you could even see the panic there, we'd say, okay, well, we're going to have to bring a team in, do an investigation. You mean into the house? Oh, yes, and no, I'd rather you not do that. Can you just give us instructions on how to handle this? And, I kind of felt like Dear Abby for the paranormal, because most people did not want your team. They'd ask me, is all your team vaccinated? And I remember I made the mistake of opening Pandora's box because I had people on the team that were both ways. There were some that were anti-vacciners, some that were for the vaccines. You had some that were anti-maskers, some that weren't. You had some that were really sure that this was a way of getting a microchip implanted into one's body. You had people on all scales in our team. And when I said, okay, here's the deal. We may have a case. We may be able to investigate, but the lady has made it very clear we have to wear masks the whole time, and everybody has to have proof of vaccinations. Well, that immediately started a rumble, and I explained to the client, I said, look, as this group leader, the one thing I have to say is that I'm sorry, but, I can't go against the laws of the land, and I mean, that's what you're asking me to do. In society, people have their own, are allowed to make their own choices. I understand it's your house, and it should be your opinion, but unfortunately, our team is divided on whether they want to wear a mask or have proof of vaccine, so I'm sorry, I can't do that. And she said, that's okay. I've already kind of thought about it. I'd rather not have people I don't know in the house. And so we got that a lot. And a lot of the complaints, a lot of the things that people talked about was more activity. And some would say, well, we've had this ghost all along, but, now it's running rampant. Or, we've had this or that. It's never happened before. I know at our place, the mirror picked up activity during that period of time.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, it was. It was, we seen a couple more shadow figures in the house. And, all that kind of picked up. And again, I think it goes back to the fact that more energy and we're stuck there. And, I remember, unfortunately, we contracted COVID before the vaccines were even available. And it was the worst of all because it was the first time we'd had it. And I think we were sick for almost 3 months. And, the worst of it was almost a month long. We had a small dog, Czar, and we had to take her out. So we would flip straws to see, because she had to go out 3 times a day at least. And, it was who was the one that felt the best to be able to take the dog out. And, I mean, it was that bad. So, I mean, it definitely generated enough energy to create this. And in the same instance, we probably missed a good opportunity to really get some active data collected, and unfortunately we couldn't, So
right. I want to actually just kind of bring something up that I don't think people talk about. So I'm going to use a parallel. So
okay.
as I age, I'm more in tune with my body,
okay.
and that's both good and bad. It creates a lot of awareness with what's actually going wrong, what's going right. It also creates a lot of anxiety.
Yes.
But so the parallel to that is, as like I'm more in tune with my body, people were spending so much time in their homes. I feel like there was probably activity always happening, but they became more in tune with what their environment was. And I feel like maybe that was also just making them more aware of what was actually probably already happening in their homes.
I agree to that with that, because I do believe that probably is. I mean, everybody got more attuned with their house in general. I know the cleaning, okay, because everybody was talking about cleaning. I remember we would, before we caught it and during it, we would sanitize the doorknobs.
Yeah.
We go through the house and we had, of course, Clorox wipes were impossible to find. They went off the shelf. You couldn't find them. You couldn't find Clorox spray. We went down, and actually after we figured out what was going on, that people were buying this up, we went down and bought some cheap bleach at the dollar store.
Yep.
And that's because the only place we could find it. And then we started making our own bleach spray. But we would wipe down the doorknobs every day, both sides, bathrooms, bedrooms. I mean, even if the bedroom weren't low, one of the spare bedrooms, we did this. And, we bought this IR device that cleaned your remote controls and your phones. So every day we would run them through this IR cleansing channel. And these things were, I don't know, $100. I had gotten it beforehand because I thought this would help with flu season. So I actually bought it before COVID, but these went to like $100. Nowadays you can pick them up for $10 in a store, easy peasy.
They're so cheap now.
Oh yeah, they've got IR wands and everything else. But everybody became more focused on everything in the house. And they noticed things more. If doors moved and things that normally didn't, well, during their busy life when they were running back and forth to work, and they didn't pay any mind to it, but suddenly, hey, I just noticed something. The spare bedroom door, it moves a lot, and, I've been up the hallway a couple times on the way to the bathroom. Each time it's in a different position, and you haven't been up there. Suddenly small details became very, very, very vibrant and very, very bright. And I think that had a lot to do with it. I think we figured out, I know we noticed a lot of noises in our house that we never really paid much mind to. And, noises outside,
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, a certain time of night, I think everybody started going outside. And we actually got married during the pandemic, and we could only have about 8 people there at mask, and we had to be careful about distancing, and to set it up was a nightmare. So I think that...
And then it rained.
Yeah, that was...
Mia and I were married during the pandemic also.
I didn't
Justice
know
of
that.
the Peace.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, Justice of the Peace.
We did a small Irish wedding, and our co-founder that's retired now, Ed, I asked him to come in to perform the service because I had done his. A friend of mine, a fellow bagpiper, bagpiped it, and we had, at that time, Andrew and his wife, chief of staff, they came, and there was my son was there, and my stepson. I think that was it, wasn't it?
Crystal.
Oh, Crystal. Yeah, my daughter was there, and but...
Yeah, that was about it.
Oh, yeah. Never do it on a day it's going to rain. I put this...
It wasn't supposed to rain.
Yeah,
actually.
it wasn't. And they changed it. And I put this 20 by 30 tarp up. And I even put we put it up. Yeah. That was one of the first arguments we had as almost a married couple. And, oh, my God. Some little Japanese guy or Chinese guy thought was funny as shit when he wrote these instructions, I guarantee you. He's over laughing his ass off. And we finally got this thing up. And apparently there was ways of tensioning the cover that went on. This is a 20 by 10 structure, and so it's like one of these portable garages. And if you don't tighten the poles with the strings around them to make the canopy taut, what happens is when it rains, it becomes a giant collection vat. And of course, it also makes a great kite in the wind. And again, none of this was planned, and we got out there. It was supposed to be a nice warm day, and it started out as a beautiful day. And we got out there, and within 15 minutes, a storm hits, and it takes out the front side of the tent. It drowns everything in water. And I had a portable air conditioner in the tent. It was very hot. It was, it was in July, so it was very, very hot. So I had to kill all the power, keep it from, causing a major issue with the water. And we ended up having it in the tent anyway, but we had to spend 2 more hours putting the tent back together and trying to dry stuff off, and it was just, but it actually turned out to be very, very nice at the end. But it was a day, but anyway, having said all that, yeah,
it was a day.
Yeah, it was a day. I mean, everybody remembers their wedding day, but we may remember it for other reasons, just in the glorious act of being wed. But I'll tell you, I remember putting that together and getting people to come in. And, one thing that I and Andrew had talked about, we afterwards we served dinner there. We had like a cookout, and we ate outside so everybody could socially distance and feel comfortable. But we were discussing some of the calls that had come in, and I mean, they had grown expeditionally. I mean, they really were. And again, we talked about meetings. We had to start. We never thought about that until we have a meeting once a month, which is kind of like our Spirit Business meeting. We had to go to online, and then for a while we had to cancel it for a couple months because no one was allowed out. So it definitely was different. One thing I wanted to point out about the 1918 Spanish flu, like I said, we were talking, there was a lot of, very much a lot of similarities. And the disease spread so fast that many churches, and this is going to sound like a mirror to COVID-19, but many schools, churches, private homes, theaters, etc. shut down and became hospitals. Telephone service collapsed. Now, that was their social media, so they immediately lost it. It was probably party lines, and they couldn't stand the bandwidth, as we'd say today.
Crank phones.
Yeah, exactly. Crank phones, and it just, they couldn't get enough power because so many people were trying to get through to them. Garbage went uncollected. There's one big problem right there. Mail piled up, and the funeral parlors ran out of caskets. Well, if you remember, there was I don't know how many places, because I was working with FEMA. We've been
Cardboard
mobilized.
box.
Yeah, they started, doing a military thing, but they're bringing cardboard boxes. They're bringing refrigeration units to put the bodies in until they get them well cared for. Now, I don't know how many, people when they passed.
And then when garbage starts getting uncollected, you have other problems.
Well, yeah, that leads to health issues. But one thing I remember the most is a lot of these folks never got a funeral. They just, the family didn't want to chance it. If they did, it was closed casket, and they televised it. A lot of the funeral homes were putting it on social media. That way people, I remember one of our dearest friends died, and it was right toward the end of COVID. He actually had a very large crowd, but they allotted how many people could come and go. That alone can cause in my opinion, can cause a ghost because you got someone that's not properly buried, and he didn't get that closure, and to see those relatives, and that certainly is going to cause issues. In many places, graves were dug to free the town and cities of rotting corpses that were piling up. If there wasn't any room in the city, libraries put a hold on, or if there wasn't any room in the cities, they would do graves outside the city. And unfortunately, at third time in 1918, it was to the point that a lot of graves weren't even marked properly. In many places, libraries put a halt on lending books, and public officials insisted people stay indoors. Quarantines were established. I remember seeing pictures of these signs on people's residences: quarantine, no one in, no one out. And, it was very, very, specific. If people had to venture out of their house, they were advised to wear a mask and avoid spitting and shaking hands. They were required to wear a mask when outside of the home. It was illegal not to. 3 waves. And I remember that at one point here in Indiana, any public business that did not have a mask sign up, wasn't enforcing the wearing of the mask, could be fined and even shut down over it. The pandemic consisted of 3 waves in 1918. The first wave started in spring of 1918 when reports from Europe came in. Then a reported 18 severe cases of influenza occurred at Fort Riley Army Base in Kansas. Now, one thing I want to point out is some of these waves were influenced by the boys coming home from World War I at the time.
Yeah.
And they were bringing it back from Europe.
Spanish flu, because they brought it back
from Spain. Yeah, it integrated into Europe, and then our boys brought it back. The second wave lethally in the fall of 1918. In Boston, the most deadly month was October, when it was reported 195,000 Americans died. Deaths occurred as far as California, North Dakota, Florida, Texas, and happened within hours or days of symptoms appearing. Theories formulated that the virus had mutated. The third and final wave appeared in spring of 1919. The flu spread unevenly throughout America and in parts of Europe and eventually died out. However, losses totaled to nearly 675,000 Americans worldwide. Reportedly, 20 million lives were lost. The plague left many children orphaned and their families destroyed. Chris French, a professor emeritus in the Department of Psychology at Goldsmiths, University of London, and head of the Anomalistic. That is a word I've never even heard before. It describes anomalies, but that's new. Psychology Research Unit said there's only anecdotal evidence that the people were reporting seeing ghosts or more. Still, because of the stressful nature of the pandemic and the general chaos of the last few years, it makes sense that people might be more apt to believe in ghosts. In November 1918, the Army released a vaccine.
I wonder if that's the precursor to the parapsychological
You talking about? Well, it could
university.
be. I mean, that may be a name at the time because, most of the time, if you see anything in parapsychology, it was over in England. So that may have been the forerunner of the parapsychology department there. Yeah, that could be. In November 1918, the Army released a vaccine with a warning. It was experimental. Oh boy, the Montana State Board of Health decided not to use it. However, it used a vaccine produced out of Minnesota at what later would become the Mayo Clinic. They said the vaccine was also experimental. It will do no harm and may do good, they wrote. We do not urge you to take it, but we wish to be in the position to furnish it if you wanted it. So a stronger support system was needed, such as medical equipment with respirators, ventilators, and treatment. And there again, that's the same thing that happened here. I remember they were trying to make respirators faster because they needed positive pressure respirators.
Yep.
And, I know...
But those are almost the exact same words that came out that they said about the COVID vaccine.
Well, and also keep in mind that now medicine is a lot more advanced. Back then, for example, they were still performing lobotomies. I mean, honestly,
God, yeah.
So there's a whole lot of distrust, if you will, back in those days for sure.
And sometimes the vaccines they gave that the medical department was working with came out of veterinary science. I mean, it really did. And I guess nowadays we think, hey, if you're going to experiment or try it out on a pig, that's not going to be the same as trying it out on a human, but they actually did human trials back then. They never published a lot of the results from them. Now they found animals that their systems are so close to humans, they've got a pretty safe run. But yeah, you're right. I mean, medicine was pretty archaic or antiquated at best. Some of the hauntings that we found out about, stories, one of the biggest ones was a lady named Helen Roberts, and she worked to Coe College. She was a student there. During the pandemic, they quarantined everybody in Vors Hall. Helen died there with other students, and she was 18 when she passed away. And, because she was quarantined there, her ghost still appears, and it still appears to this day. And students report seeing a girl in white. She disappears down the hallway, and, there's noises and movements that are heard in the room where she died. And, of course, the hallway where she disappears she disappears into her room. There was I guess the most of the sightings were reported in these areas. St. Augustine Spanish Hospital, Dry Tortugas, Key West. That's odd. That's a small area. Of course, it probably has ghosts for other reasons, but, certainly being part of that area of Florida where, there was anything from bootleggers to pirates to, God, it could be a lot of things. Rolling Hills Asylum, New York, that's a familiar name. Greenville TB Hospital, Baltimore Hotel, Miami, Public Hospital in San Francisco. Is it Biltmore? I'm sorry, I didn't read that right. Biltmore. I should have brought my readers up. Alcatraz and Old City Ghosts. I don't know what Old City Ghosts is. I have no idea.
They're from the Old City.
I guess so, yeah. But, yeah, the coronavirus, in retrospect, killed 600,000 Americans so far. Now, many, many of them, the problem we get is it actually killed a lot more than the Spanish, but they were complicated. When they look at the death, unless, COVID, in about any case, caused every other problem you had to become a complication of COVID. So you died of a heart attack with a complication of COVID. You died of respiratory, either obstructed lung, or you died of pneumonia with complication of COVID. So the numbers aren't tallied well, but, they're believed that somewhere around 200 million people died in the end of things, depending on how it was classified. 1918 influenza epidemic sparked a spiritualism craze. And this is something I found was real interesting. As I looked at it, people started getting more into spiritualism and started breaking out the seances and the Ouija boards and trying to contact members that had passed. In the same thing as we were talking earlier, 9/11, after the terrorist attack, within about a year, they started seeing a lot more, especially in New York around Ground Zero. They see more and more reports of apparitions. When the dear God, tsunami is what it is, and I couldn't get it out of my mouth. Tsunami struck Japan in 2011. It killed at least 20,000 people. Inhabitants of that town still report seeing their loved ones and other ones. And I watched a special on this, and it was kind of interesting. A lot of the Japanese people were seeing their relatives come back, and the special I watched, they brought this Buddhist priest in who would go to their homes and try to, no different than we do over here, try to cleanse the home. And they were talking about how it had to be done and so forth. But, as through my reading, I found a lot of really interesting things. And one of them, I actually got a quote from Jason Halls from TAPS. And it said, let's see, your paranormal investigators believe some are likely real deal, but others have similar explanations. People are spending more time in their home, and everything from the wood drying out and getting popping sounds to, things warming up in the warmer months are all triggering ghost reports, said Jason Halls, the host of TAPS and Ghost Nation. So, who is one of the members of TAPS from widely popular shows as Ghost Hunters, addresses the increasing cases of paranormal activity considered self-paranoia, which seems to be a factor given the entire world was in a state of paranoia and the death rate increasing week after week due to the variant COVID-19. Also weighing in on his thoughts about the increase in paranormal activity with slightly different opinion is John E. L. Tinney, a paranormal researcher and former host of televised ghost programs like Ghost Stalker. On May 15, 2020, Tinney told CBC Radio an interview that he was used to receiving 2 to 5 calls a month about possible paranormal activity happening in homes. But as soon as the pandemic took place, those calls had increased to 5 to 10 calls a week. Everything from your typical knocks and footsteps in the hallway to some very new, strange occurrences, like people hearing whispered voices through their television sets or getting text messages from long deceased friends and relatives. He tells the host as it happens on the podcast as it happens. So, everybody had seen the same thing I think we saw. I don't think that there was any differences to that. I think everybody was in agreement. Now, go
real
ahead.
Quick.
Yeah.
Going back to the spiritualism craze,
yeah.
It almost sounds like a second wave of transcendentalism.
Transcendental?
Transcendentalism.
Well, it could be. I mean,
that's where all that seance and,
well, sure. I mean, Uncle Ed dies, and and the family goes, we didn't get him a chance to say goodbye. Let's grab a Ouija board and see if we can call him up. I mean, I'm sure that had a lot to do with it.
The first time it happened was the 1800s.
Well, and not just spiritualism, but people get more spiritually invested when emergencies happen. It's funny.
Seances and
mm-hmm.
that really fell out of vogue.
There was a friend I was in the Navy with, and I'll never forget it. He said one time, even an atheist will pray if your life's in danger enough. And I think that's the same thing with anybody. Your spiritualism in times of stress, war, whatever you want, whatever the reason the stress is there, that increases. You tend to become more thinking, because you're thinking about it. You're sitting there going, oh my God, am I going to get this and die? Is this the last year I have on this planet? I mean, I think that's a big part of it. I really do. So, Eric, what are your thoughts on that?
You want to do a seance?
Actually.
Yeah. Would you do a seance? You don't have any?
I mean, sure. I mean, I actually have a Ouija board here. Might as well.
Yeah.
Let's
go
to it.
Well, I think a lot of people, of course, anybody that dies, the relatives miss them and they want to contact them. But I think it's more driven during then, especially now. A couple of sad stories that I'd heard during COVID was, and I knew this because at the time, Andrew's one set of parents or wife's parents was in a nursing home, and they could go and walk up to the window of their unit, and they could talk back and forth that way. And they'd gotten her a tablet so she could, text, and they could FaceTime and so forth. But that was one of the things I remember. There was one individual in the hospital, and a buddy of mine was a nurse that worked the ward, and he told me, they had to say goodbye to her over a tablet. They brought the tablet in, and each person got to talk to her, and she couldn't talk a lot, but, they got to visit with her a little bit, and she was dead within 2 hours. And, so there was a lot of disconnect there in being able to finalize the grieving procedure. So I think that,
I would think that at least if they knew they were going to be gone within a few hours, they let at least a very immediate family.
They couldn't.
Like
the contact was too much of a risk to bring them in, because especially, you got to remember, some people were just carriers. They were just typhoid Marys. They would never get it but carry it.
You had to suit them up.
Well, I know it sounds easy, but trying to get a Tyvek suit. I remember one of my guys, and he probably listens to this, and I got saying
that.
Yeah, because I hadn't retired yet. And for whatever reason, he thought it was a good idea to don a level 2 hazmat suit to go to the grocery. Now, needless to say, the effect...
I don't know.
Well, I don't know, but the effect he had on some of the shoppers was not a positive thing. You know, it was kind of like starting a zombie shoot for the movie. I mean, dear God, you know, and then, you know, because people looked at him and said, well, he's with the fire service, and he's wearing that. He knows something we don't know. Yeah, why would you do that? Oh, my God, I was ready to kill him. And, but, yeah, he wore that suit in there. I mean, but it's hard to get. And the suit wasn't even a great suit. It was a decommissioned suit that we had used in hazmat. But, I mean, people couldn't get Tyvek suits. I mean, you know, and if they could, the people who needed them was the healthcare providers. You know, the creepiest thing, I remember reading... Anybody feel free to share, but I remember reading a thing about a nurse, and luckily their family had a camper. They'd bought a travel trailer, and it was out in the driveway, and she stayed in it because she was taking care of COVID people, and they had run the sewer line into their clean out and had water and electrical, and she couldn't come in the house because she was afraid to carry something into the house and to the kids, and they didn't get into her car. She drove a separate car. She would go out and sanitize it, but I mean, you know, for like 6 months, her kids, the only way she saw them was through the window of her trailer. And I mean, people had to, I mean, you know, you had to do what you had to do to keep people healthy. So I could see where this should have caused a lot more ghosts, in my opinion, than's being reported. I mean, you know.
So
it probably
back
has,
during the pandemic, Mia was actually, she's a nurse outside of her paranormal life. She was working in the medical surgical unit in Daytona Beach, and so she got to experience a lot of, you know, a lot of taking care of COVID patients, and because there were so many restrictions on visitors, basically they really didn't get visitors much. There were a lot of people that passed away lonely, and so that creates this type of energy.
True.
Unfinished business.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, you know, if your wife is laying there in bed and she's not near her husband or kids and she dies all alone, you know damn well that's going to be, that's going to be unfinished business. She'll want to come back. So, you know, I think more and more as we go down the line, we're going to see more and more episodes of this. I really do. I really do. I think we're going to see more and more of this happen, and I think we'll see more and more opportunities where we will have more of this activity starting to show up. Now, where people will recognize it as a COVID ghost or not, I don't know. That, you know, it depends on the circumstance, I suppose. You know, a lot of places that were used for, okay, you know, we did an episode a while back on the Indiana State Fair Coliseum, and we talked about the apparitions that were seen around the Coliseum from the explosion that had died there that reappeared. And, you know, we don't know of any apparitions since the time they, you know, of course, construction theory, they redid it and apparently canceled out the activity. But, you know, certainly some of these places that were used as hospitals and were used as morgues, probably more hospitals than morgues, obviously, but, you know, they're going to produce apparitions at some point. It's coming. You know, I have no doubt in my mind it's coming. And I think we will see that very, very shortly. You know, I think, you know, it's been 5 years, but, you know, people will start coming up with that. I think what was... and I think they did in Florida, too. What was the... didn't they use in Florida and Texas, they used a couple of the sporting arenas as a portable morgue setup for a while because they had ice. They were able to do ice skating, and they actually put the ice rink up and used them to store bodies?
Yeah.
I thought they did.
That is true.
Yeah, as I remember thinking back on that, because I know up here they had talked about it. Now, we never released it to the public, but one of the briefings I had, because every morning you had a briefing. Every morning at 1100 hours we had a briefing. And I was online, and everybody had to be there, and we were put on standby. The most we were doing was going to be giving, you know, inoculations. But they had ordered a ton of trailers from the military, refrigerated trailers, to use to store bodies, and they'd put them at the fairgrounds, and people were freaking out about it. They brought in probably 8 or 10 of them to use as a backup storage for the mortuaries and the morgues, and they made a mortuary officer there that logged the bodies so people weren't getting lost. And, you know, so, you know, again, they were, you know, some areas they were using the ice rinks for storage. So I'm wondering how soon before we start seeing, you know, some of that rolling out. You know it's got to happen, and I would think anyway.
And actually, if you want to go back even further, in larger cities like New York that don't have like traditional, suburban funeral homes and what have you, they're basically brick fronts, just like in town. They were bringing in refrigerated trucks and parking them right outside on the street. Yeah. And putting dead bodies like right out on the street. So you're going to see spirits in plain sight.
It's going to happen. I think so. And I think, there were so many tragic tales that, and the problem is we so soon forgot. It's like I always tell people about 9/11. Every having been there, every year I put a wreath out and a candle. It starts that morning. I get it down about 6 o'clock, and I light the candle, and it stays lit all day on the 11th. And the reason for that simply is to honor them, because I will always remember that. I'll remember every second of that. I think most of us will. Our parents remembered Pearl Harbor, and people nowadays don't think much about it. But that was the biggest terrorist attack of the time, was Pearl Harbor. And it created an egregious amount of ghosts. I'll be honest with you. I was reading one of, actually, I think I was watching one of the YouTubes that Dunlap is on, and he's really great. Kagan Dunlap, he's a Marine officer, and he runs a program. And Norton, who did Tales from the Grid Square, he has a bunch of tales in his book. But, I think about every ship out there is haunted. There isn't too many military bases or vessels that don't have a death, maybe not even, certainly most of them aren't wartime related, but it's a dangerous situation. It happens. And, and it happens, I think, same way with most people in the industrial area. Most people that work in an industrial complex, no matter how safe they try to be, there's still accidents, and we, of course, going back to when OSHA and safety regs weren't around, you take slosh furnace, that one has a tremendous amount. I always wonder about Bethlehem Steel after they closed it, because they lost quite a few people. Ford, it had a good handful of people that died there. I remember distinctly there was a gentleman who shot him. He committed suicide. He shot himself through the mouth in the back parking lot, which is now woods. And then there was
It might be a parking lot again, since that new.
A new complex when it could be. I don't know.
I wonder if they've seen anything.
No, well,
build up.
Any
of the new.
The problem with the plant was very old, and it made so many noises you couldn't tell what was paranormal, what was just poor maintenance.
Well, I'm talking about the new.
You talking about the new? Yeah, now that's one of the Monarch Beverage facilities.
I wonder if any of the employees
it could. Anything. We had people that died there, lots of them. And I mean, one particular individual had a stroke, and he died before they could get him transferred. There was always a rule, and this goes on any industrial complex. No one dies there. They die at the hospital. Hint, hint. So in other words, you keep them, you either perform CPR or whatever until you arrive at the hospital, because no one dies on company property. And a lot of companies have that. It's never spoken. It's not a spoken rule. But if they have their own fire service, their own EMS, they'll always make sure that it was reported that he died at the hospital. You see a lot of times, in the catch of that is you'll read the news story and it says, pronounced dead at the hospital. Well, yeah, he was probably dead at the company. They didn't want anybody to know about it. So certainly, I remember why I'm bringing this up is I was talking to a guy the other day. We were out and we did a lecture. And after the lecture, I was talking to him, and he says, it's hard to find haunted houses around here, isn't it? And I'm thinking, no, about everyone. I mean, in all honesty, obviously every house is haunted. But, I mean, there's enough haunted facilities around here that, dear God. I mean, somebody said name, 5, and I whipped off 5 real quick. I mean, I could whip off 50 names of haunted locations in Indianapolis alone. I mean, that's pretty standard, like what Eric's talking about. New York, Chicago, oh my God, they have far more than that, So, yeah, there's a lot more haunting around than people realize. And, when you start looking at the base calls for this, how many times? Coconut Grove, that's still haunted from the Coconut Grove fire. There's one in San Francisco that they were were stamped and stampeded out of the facility, and they trampled several kids and stuff, and they still appear. So, I mean, that's going to continue to happen because that's the nature of mankind. So
Mount St. Helens.
Yeah, now that's an interesting one. That's almost like Pompeii. But, that's about all I've got. Eric, do you have any final thoughts on any of this?
No, I the only other thing I would say is, be on the lookout because there could be, society has changed so much. The next thing you may be hearing is a new class of spirit or ghost based on societal changes.
That's very, very good point. I mean, you may very well. I mean, you're starting to see some shifts, and that could be interesting.
We should start seeing ghosts from the 80s. No.
Well, that's scary. The hairdos alone.
I want to see Prince and Michael Jackson if I'm going to see any ghosts.
Yeah, in my time it was Elvis. We wanted to see. There was a radio show. I think it's still on. Bob and Tom on 95.
You should see some from the 70s too. I mean.
Yeah. Jimi Hendrix and Elvis and
older ghosts should be losing their energy by now, so we should be getting younger ghosts.
Yeah, and so are we saying that ghosts age like we do?
I don't know about that, but
they're getting older. They're losing their energy and their drive.
They lose energy as time goes on.
Okay, good point.
We have documented that.
Well, yes, I agree. I just had to bring that up because that's the first thing that popped in my mind, But I mean, we could start seeing some of that. Eric's very right. I mean, we could see that starting to come about, and with social divides and things, things happen faster now because we have social media. So,
yes.
And the other thing is hoaxing. I mean, my God, it's gotten worse. I've seen it a lot with, X and certainly Facebook. I'm not as big on Instagram, but I'm sure it's there too. I mean, you get a lot of people, a lot of sensationalism, and
if I could count the number of times I've seen Bruce Willis's death announcement already.
God, yeah.
It's really just shocking.
Alan Jackson.
We always laugh because my 89-year-old mother used to call me every day and go, "Did you see Alan Jackson died today?" I go, No, I did not, because she could never get the understanding that not everything on Facebook is true. So Alan Jackson
it's not?
Yeah. I mean, that was her theory. It's not. So every other week, Alan Jackson would die. I told her, I said, that son of a bitch got to have a hell of a funeral bill, because every other week he'd die, and
every so often Travis Tritt.
Yeah, Travis Tritt. Yeah, he would die. Now, the one that got me was, I was trying to remember who it was that passed. But someone passed. I blew it off thinking that she'd, read some other BS on Facebook. Turned out he really did die. It's like, holy cow.
It wasn't Toby Keith, was it?
I think it was. I think it was Toby.
Toby died a while
well, this was a long time ago.
Oh.
It was a while back. It was either Toby Keith or Sean Connery. And I think it was Sean Connery, because it came as a shock when he died. 'Cause I thought it was just, propaganda on the news. But, I think that certainly all that together could change the way we look at things. So, I mean, I honestly think that may be something that we'll have to watch. So, well, with that being said, we are now going to do the Ghost Story of the Day, and that will be with Heather Lawson. And folks, I can't thank you enough for being here tonight and listening to Ghost to Ghost. Again, we produce on the 15th and the 30th of every month. And if you have any questions, go on Facebook. Mia Kerr, which just so happens to be the wife of Eric on the line here, she will pick up the emails, and either one of us will gladly answer it if you have a question about the show. We do advertise. If you want to make a commercial, get a hold of me, get a hold of our advertising and marketing staff. I mean, we'll be more than happy to help you out there. So, folks, on behalf of Spirit and Ghost to Ghost, have a good evening. Folks, it's time for the Ghost Story of the Day with Heather Lawson.
I have a dining room encounter with a beloved aunt. This was originally found on Teen Vogue. Not sure which issue, but if anybody knows, please help us out. ADCs may serve another function in the world created by COVID to reassure people who couldn't be at the side of their loved ones when they died. Consider the story of Jamie Jackson, an office manager who lives near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and her beloved Aunt Pat. Jackson's aunt died of a heart attack last summer after her complications with COVID. Jackson said her aunt was like a mother to her, someone she spent summers with and accompanied to the hospital for routine medical visits. But when her aunt was afflicted with COVID, Jackson couldn't visit the hospital to reassure her. That was the hardest thing, Jackson says. You can't say goodbye. You can't be there as an advocate for your loved one, which is difficult because you have somebody who's in the hospital who's scared and not used to being alone. Several months later, though, Jackson says she heard from her aunt again. It was December, and Jackson was putting up Christmas decorations in the house while Bing Crosby sang holiday carols. Christmas was one of her aunt's favorite holidays, and she loved decorating. Jackson's bin was filled with the same decorations that once belonged to her aunt. Jackson says she left the bin in her hallway to get something, and when she returned, she saw a translucent figure peering into it. It was the figure of a petite woman with the same haircut, color of hair, and white blouse and blue slacks that her aunt used to wear. Jackson froze. Her heart started pounding. She fled to her dining room and started crying. When she returned, the figure was gone. She says it was her aunt. It was overwhelming, she says. It's hard to put into words. I felt touched by that. It's obvious that she's around and visiting me.
Thanks for listening to Ghost. Again, I'm your host, Chief Lawson. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats on the 15th and 30th of the month at midnight. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, maybe have a question or subject you'd like to ask about on air, or be used on the show, please email us at ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com, ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com. I want to thank my production staff on Spirit, Jennifer Verne, our research manager and our producer, and Heather Lawson, our trainer on Spirit and our podcast director, for helping make these podcasts possible. My chief of staff, Andrew Brooks, for his guidance and help on the scripts, and everyone else involved. Thank you so much. See you next time. Until then, stay safe and remember the truth is out there. Good night. Ghost to Ghost podcast and its contents is the property of Spirit Paranormal Ltd. All rights reserved. We welcome you to download and play the podcast and share with others for personal use. You may not, except with written permission, use or distribute its contents for commercial use. Spirit Indiana Paranormal, covering the Hoosier State since 2002, Indy's oldest parapsychology investigation group. If you're experiencing what you believe to be paranormal issues, reach out to us for help at www.spiritindiana.com or call our hotline at 317-883-9103. Again, that is www.spiritindiana.com or our hotline at 317-883-9103. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and the ones you love, and be safe out there.